as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of Veterans of the Valley. He was born in Idaho and he lived in Michigan. And he was attending Michigan State University when they heard someplace called Pearl Harbor had been attacked. He didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was, but he did just about what every other able-bodied young man did. He enlisted, thinking the war would be over before he got there. Little did he know. Veterans of the Valley welcomes Bill Pope to today's show. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
What was it like when you heard Pearl Harbor was bombed and you enlisted? Take us from that point.
It was sort of confusion as far as the people were concerned. As you say, they were aware that we were in Hawaii, but they had no other idea what was happening. And then, of course, the way it was handled was the thing that really excited a lot of people to settle up this thing and get it straight.
Right.
And so there were a lot of heroes that came out of this, a lot of heroes that weren't known about, and didn't receive the plaudits that perhaps they should.
Right. It was more or less a war that pretty much changed the face of our country.
That's right.
And the livelihood of it and so forth. But take us through your training. Where all did you go real quick for training?
Well, we all looked around, you know, for the one that we thought would be the most damaging to the enemy. There were things like the Merchant Marine. The Marine Corps was one of the ones that everybody enjoyed, was proud of. The Army was kind of down the list, but that's where many of them showed up. And the Air Corps, most of us didn't believe that we could enter the Corps, that we were good enough,
right?
Both physically and otherwise. And so consequently, when my roommate said, let's go down to Lansing and to see if we can get in the Air Corps, I kind of shrugged it off. And what turned out was that he didn't make it and I did. So we started out. So then we were put in another world that we hadn't realized, but one that I think did a lot for veterans as much as what they did for the others.
And you were all of 20, 21 at that time?
21, yeah. Ready to try everything, you know, that came along.
You had the world by the tiger by the tail, more or less.
Right.
You were ready to go at it.
And of course, we were a little puzzled by what they did at the beginning. They took our group and put them clear down in Florida. In fact, in Miami for a while, as a kind of a stockpile of cadets that they could use. And then after that, went up to Pennsylvania to a junior college there, still as a group, still a long way from piloting a plane. And then finally went back to San Antonio. And then finally, after that, went north. So one thing we could never understand about the Army was their logic in moving
Constantly
these things
moving
around.
Huh?
That's right.
You tell us, you have an interesting story about some flight training. I believe it was on like May 13th of �43. Was that the right date? Maybe 12th?
Well, yeah, I had several bouts with them, you might say. When we were there at near Clarion College near Pittsburgh, they gave us our first rides in airplanes. I'd never been one before or not. These were Piper Cubs. And you really get a sensation of flying in a Piper Cub.
That's the old stick type. That's
So as we were going out one day with this fella, a storm came up and he had to land that thing through a couple of trees and just about took us off. So I began to see that there were some hazards as far as flying was concerned. But it gets in your blood.
Absolutely. Tell us about, you have a quick little story about basically Lake Worth. And a lot of people around here won't know that, but obviously it made the Fort Worth Star-Telegram from a long time ago.
This was a most unusual thing. This was in the latter part of our training mission. We were flying B-24s at that particular time. And we left for the evening to do some night work. They wanted us to do a lot of flying at night. And we got up northeast of Dallas and Fort Worth in that quadrant area up there and started back, and they had the instructor pilot and the other student pilot and myself, and we also had an engineer that went with us, which is required because they wanted somebody to do the plane and so forth. We came down in on the east side of what is Fort Worth now, and of course everything was still lit up at that particular time. And since the other student pilot had done the takeoff, it was up to me to land it. And so we were doing the flying then. We made a circle around the south side of Fort Worth and made the base leg that would put us across where the runway should be.
More or less like the approach?
Well lighted. Yeah, well lighted at that time. And so I made the turn and was then going kind of crossed where the runway would be. And we had some flaps down in the wing, and we had our gear down. So all of the things moved hydraulically were dropped down.
Right.
And so I made the turn and lined up with the runway, which was perfectly set as far as I was concerned.
What was your altitude about now?
Well, we were probably only about a couple thousand feet at that time. We were going to lose right into the runway itself. And I felt this kind of tug on the controls, and that wasn't unusual because sometimes the instructor pilot would pull an engine on you so that to get you used to that sort of thing.
See how you react in situations.
And so when that happened, I wasn't too concerned, but I know that he was, and he was in the other seat, and I looked through his window and there was flames coming out of the engine. That was a number 3 engine, which is right up against the fuselage on the right.
On the co-pilot side.
Yeah, and one of the real problems of that, Carl, is that that is the engine that has the hydraulic system.
Oh, okay.
And so of all 4, if you didn't want an engine to go out, number 3 was the one that you wanted to do the last. So I realized then that we were in trouble, and we had our gear down and our flaps down, and we had no hydraulic way to handle
So
anything.
you also had a lot of drag
That's
because
right.
you had flaps down and gears
And
down.
this, we were over Lake Worth at that time, which is just on the west side of
Right.
Fort Worth. So we were moving around in a circle there, and the controls were getting awful mushy, and the airspeed was really dropping down. And then all of a sudden, the instructor pilot said, "This is it." And you could
So he pretty much knew something just from your airspeed dropping.
Yeah, I knew something was going to come up. Yeah,
Right.
we had to get that the flaps and gear on if we were going to land. But I'll say in a minute that may have been the worst thing we could have done was to have landed. We were out over the water at that time in this lake, and all of a sudden you could feel the plane dropping, and that's the last thing I knew.
Wow.
And the next thing I knew,
And it dropped from what, about to 1,500 feet, 1,200 feet?
we must have been at least 1,000 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. We were
That's
letting
pretty-
down.
that's
at
a pretty
that
far
time.
away.
That's right. So we were then in a real pickle at that time. We were over this lake, and we'd lost our airspeed and we're stalled out. And that's the last that I remember. And the next thing I remember was that I was sitting in my seat in the water up to my waist.
Wow.
Down below. And you're just so dulled at that time. You don't know what the situation might be, but you knew it was a serious thing. But you're still alive, whole thing. I remember unbuckling my belt and standing up in the water about to my waist, and there was a plane up ahead of me, rolled up on its back, the 2 landing gears swiveling straight up, and the pictures they have in the paper is exactly what I saw on that.
Wow.
So I started to wade to shore, and there was a lot of debris all scattered through the lake. And I was wading, kind of winding myself along, and yelled for help, and suddenly lights came on in the cottages that were near that shore. And I got close to the bank, and a couple of arms went down and dragged me up out of the water and so forth.
So you crashed pretty close to shore, right next to a cottage development.
That's right. In fact, the wing of one of our planes went right through a building, right up above where a fellow was sleeping in the cottage.
Goodness.
And as I say, the rest of it was just completely crumpled up and so forth. The plane was on its back. It had just like you'd taken it and just tortured it.
And actually one serviceman did lose his life, but 3 of you survived a fall from 1,000 feet.
Alden Powell was the engineer, and I think that he was down in the bomb bay trying to get an auxiliary pump going so we'd have some hydraulic pressure. So he was doing his duty. He was from Portland, and he was the one that lost his life.
Wow.
Now I found out that also the other pilot, a student pilot, was thrown clear on down on the beach and lived. And also the instructor pilot, believe it or not, was thrown on top of a house in that. Because I remember walking by and seeing him sitting on top of the house, and I thought, this is a crazy thing.
Wow.
But then by that time the lights had come on, and of course they knew back at the base that we'd had trouble, and so they sent a couple ambulances out to get us and load us up and take us out on the thing.
So you've been through an ordeal like that, and basically you just have to keep going.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it was. They couldn't believe when they picked me up that I didn't have some internal injury, and I know they got me back to the base there, and I took every X-ray they could make and so forth. The only thing was that my ankle was a little bit scarred, and I had a cut above my eye.
Wow.
And that's the only two things that I had at that time.
After falling from, what, 1,000 feet or so in a B-24.
So it's incredible that it ever got out. And I've often thought that you look back on it, if we would have made the runway, as soon as that slipstream was gone, that place would have blown up. Mm-hmm. And if we'd have landed farther out in the lake, the B-24, you enter in through the bomb bay.
Right on the belly side.
Which would already be underwater. And if you'd gone farther toward the land, you'd not only put yourself out, but you'd have had tremendous fire and so forth when the
right.
Fluid.
You could have gone into that cottage
right.
complex
Right.
instead of into the edge.
So
of the
when
water.
you look back at it, and I've done it 1,000 times, there was no other way that you could have got out of that plane.
That has to be one in a million or one in
It
an
must be on
astronomical
that.
amount.
It must be on that. It was all unplanned. It was one of those things. Those things happen in warfare to fellows that were on the front lines, you know, mm-hmm. so forth. So that was quite an experience, and that was right before we checked out our crews and got ready to go across sea.
Okay. So you, where did you go to build your crew?
Well, we went to first up to there at Fort Worth and on up into Nebraska. And they'd assigned you radio operators, they assigned you mechanical people,
right.
People that were gunners and so forth. Then we went to Idaho.
And a B-24 crew is what, 10 people? 10?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then in Idaho, that was mostly for gunnery training and formation training and things like that.
Right.
But it's great for me because I had relatives in Idaho. That's
yeah,
where
you were
I was
back
born.
home. Yeah, you were back home.
So I thoroughly enjoyed that as we got to it. But that's where you put together a team, and it's amazing how that team stays together, at least during the war. You lose
right.
them after the war, but they see a real responsibility for what
so
they
where,
do.
when you finally got over to Europe, into England, where were you stationed at?
Well, we were stationed at a little place called Wendling, and the 8th Air Force, as you say, had I don't know how many planes. Well, later on, we joined them. They had 1,000 planes
Wow.
they put up.
Yeah, real quick, isn't Wendling somewhat north of London? Or am I
Yeah, about 50 miles north
okay.
of London. A small village, and of course all that around there. We went in and built about 25 or 30 air bases.
Wow.
And one of the advantages of that East Anglia position in Britain, which is right above London, is that you can do all your maneuvers and getting together and everything over the ice, the North Sea.
The North Sea.
So you don't then get in any trouble, you might say,
right.
that you can't handle. If you get in the North Sea, which is not the thing to try because
right.
it wouldn't last long. So really what they put together then was a very efficient program. And I look back on it and wonder, our particular wing there had 3 squadrons. Each squadron would have 10 or more planes, and there'd be 3 of those wings in each part.
Wow.
And you could see before you got through, they could mount some mighty devastating things from that. Of course, we
right.
didn't have the atomic bomb or anything else, but we could play a pretty heavy load on
right.
that area.
We've got some pictures that you were nice enough to loan us, and some of them are even you and your wife, I believe, went back.
Yes,
to England to see that old airfield
right.
and a monument, and I think we've got some pictures of that along with. There we go, and now that that is a sharp-looking serviceman.
That's when you're younger on that, Kyle.
Where was this photo? Was this your official?
Oh, that must have been when we were there at Fort Worth at the Carswell base out there. So
you're a handsome-looking soldier.
and this is just before we left to go to England. We had come back from Idaho, and we were at Topeka, Kansas, of all places.
Now, is that actually your 24 that you're sitting in front of?
No, that was just one that happened to be parked in the field.
One that happened to be parked there, okay.
And,
but that is your crew, and where are you at in that picture?
well, over here, squatted on the right.
Oh, okay,
And
down, you're squatting
down.
down?
The center was Snow Hill, my co-pilot, and to the left was Bernstein, the navigator. And so you can look at a place like that, and you just count off what they were. So,
wow. That's really great.
And unfortunately, with the exception of one or two, that's about all
That's all that's left?
I know of yet.
Where was this picture taken?
Oh, that was back in Michigan, where Mother had a lot of roses there by our
Okay.
milk house, and that was during the time when I had to leave, little leave and so forth.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
and you
now-
could
now here-
imagine how they felt when they got a telegram that morning that said that there'd been a car accident, a
Right.
plane
A
accident.
plane accident,
yeah.
right.
And of course, then the question was, are you still alive? And you know, at that time, the person that was handling the telegraph and so forth, to show you how people pull together, he told Mother before what he told her what had happened. He said, "This is going to be all right." And you know, they went out of their way to kind of help the people back home as
Sure.
to what might happen.
I can understand that. Let's go back to the pictures. I believe now we're going to start looking. This is the monument.
Yes, after we left and abandoned that base, which is several years after the war was over,
Right.
then all the veterans got together and put some money together to have a recognition of
Right.
what the people are there. See, there were 760 people that lost their lives out of that base alone.
Wow.
Just that one airport.
Now, were those Americans or was that also RAF?
No, just Americans.
Just Americans.
Yeah. But you stop and think of all the loss that you have
Right.
of people, and it's unbelievable. It's always nice to have that monument there at Wendling, and it was poised right at the end of the runway where we used to take off.
Wow.
And now the runway was farmed actually and lost. But to
We have a
stand there-
picture of one of the old runways, I believe.
Yeah. And,
And, well,
consequently,
speaking of-
this was what it looked like now, after we had gone many a plane
Right.
off that particular deal.
If that runway could talk, more or less, I guess, yeah.
Oh, it could. It surely could. Good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
See, when we took off with one of those loaded planes, we had about 2,000 gallons of petrol, high octane gas. We had about 3 tons of bombs.
Those were 500-pound bombs, weren't they, I think?
Yeah. And then we had all the ammunition for each one of the people there, and several other things too. So when a plane took off, they had to have pretty good structure to
Right.
be able to make the takeoff that they wanted.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, what this looks like an old Quonset hut. Was this basically your barracks back then?
Probably was, or it might have been one where we had our briefings before we left. And the briefings, when you started out that morning, you had no idea where you're going to bomb.
Right.
But then when you got in it, they had a ribbon that started with our base and might go clear out to the other end, and that was the one that you were going to take out that particular day. And I'll never forget the time I walked in, and one of them went to Berlin, right straight over the top of that. So you didn't know before the takeoff started where you're going to go,
Right.
and you could operate from then.
Oh, now here we go. That is a B-24, is it not?
Well, you know, the 24 took a lot of bad feelings during the war, but they were a pretty good ship. They could do one thing that others couldn't: mass production.
Right.
And you see in Long Beach, California, at Fort Worth, Texas, and at the Willow Run in Detroit, they were turning them out almost every hour.
Wow.
And so really the thing that this plane could do would be to mass production, and they had a lot of them that went out to all the phases
Right.
of the war.
Right.
And this is the front end of the 24 there at Duxon at the museum, and they now have a full plane. At that time, they only had a part of the nose plane of the plane.
That's got to be a special feeling to stand there and look at that nose section there and put your hand on it and know that
it really does.
It basically
yeah,
formed a part of history.
And one of the interesting things, we had a meeting of the veterans of the 8th Air Force there at Fort Worth, and went out to the airstrip out there at Carswell, and there were planes stacked up just like they were, and just in the same position they were as when we were flying them out.
That had to raise the hair on the back of your neck a little bit. I
That
can see
made you
that.
think of all the time that it's been.
I can imagine.
This,
What is this picture?
There at Duxford, they have in this museum, Air Museum, they have on the panels the names of everybody that was lost.
Much like the Vietnam
Yeah,
Memorial.
and that's all of the North Sea groups, you might say.
Right.
And they have nearly 7,000
Wow.
that actually had lost their lives on that.
And I believe here in this picture you're actually finding one of your old
So
comrades.
I wanted to find a couple of the old ones, and my niece was with me. And I said, see if you can find Bill Aker. And she said, yeah, he's there on panel number 26. And she went through a couple others that I knew that had flown and gone down. And I said, give me Bob Johnson. And she said, well, there's a whole batch of Robert Johnsons. I said, look for Robert H. Johnson. And she said, yeah, there it is.
Sure enough, it was
And
there.
so and he was a real close friend of mine while I was over there, and he was lost over the North Sea in bad weather. And so it was kind of interesting to me to see his name up there at that particular time.
What about some of your missions? You went through, what, 23 missions?
Yeah,
And all missions, every single one is a little bit different. Some of them are kind of easy, some of them are kind of hard, but you had some pretty harrowing type
And
missions.
you often wonder why they picked a mission.
Right.
As you start. But really the two things that they wanted the 8th Air Force to do, they wanted them to cut their supply routes, to take out their transportation for them, also to take out anything connected with lubricant, oil.
Right.
And so what they did is concentrate their groups to fight over things that would give the biggest loss of those. So things like Magdeburg, which is east of Berlin, we bombed that thing into eternity.
Right.
And others that you could find, you know, that they would pick out. But what they did, of course, is almost paralyze. And one of the missions we took, while the Battle of the Bulge was going on, they wanted to try to, again, control the movement of the German troops. And so they sent us to this town of Ahrweiler. And the reason for that was this was a main a rail trunk to get supplies over to where the Germans were fighting us. And it was up against a bank there. And the idea was that we would drop them and see if we could collapse that bank clear along there. Or if we missed that, we could knock the rail out and so forth. Well, I think that they had about every 88 cannon in the German army aimed at us. I've never seen flak like that. Yeah. Every plane in our group was hit.
Wow.
But fortunately, none of them went down. But I think that was the heaviest flak that I ever saw while I was there. But it showed you how air power could really stop and protect our own troops by that sort of thing.
Right. Was there any other mission that anything really that stands out in your mind?
Oh, there's a whole host of them that kind of come back to you and so forth. I guess the one that was closest to me was one that happened over Dortmund, which is in the Ruhr area of Germany. And that was a big area for storage oil and so forth and so on.
Right.
And we started out that morning. They usually would give us a short lunch to start off with. We might not have anything else. But I was sitting by a fellow, Joe Schuster, and another fellow by the name of Rob. And one of them was going to be in the formation that we had there, and I was a little up front because I thought that I had more missions than he did, and consequently I should be flying Spart. Actually, what happened was in the formation of the plane, you have the 3 planes up there and then 3 below them.
Right.
And the one below them we called the slot.
Okay.
And that's where they took the best flying for the leader of that part of a formation and so forth. So we got over the drop and so forth, and all of a sudden I looked up and Schuster was on one side and the other fellow was on the other, back behind him. And Schuster was plowing ahead, and his propeller went right through the wings of the plane ahead of him and scattered it, just shredded the other wings. And of course, both of them just quit. And I remember that there was debris all around, and we pulled up and got out of there to avoid it. But you could see when they went down, our crew thought that 2 or 3 chutes came out, and apparently only a couple made it. So what you see in the morning then is gone by evening.
Right.
And that's one thing about the air end of it, they're gone. And consequently, they're out of business at that time.
Right.
So that was quite a deal for me. I had wanted to be in Schuster's place, and it was a good thing that I was where I was, or I wouldn't have been on them.
Absolutely.
So those things happen all during
Right.
war.
We've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Oh, what?
About your family.
Oh, well, while I was getting my wings there at Aldous Air Base in Oklahoma, down the road about 30 miles was a young co-ed that was going to college. But we didn't meet for 8 more years, or
You
6
didn't know
more
she was
years. So then we've had 3 children, and we have 5 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild.
Okay.
But that was sure funny that you would differentiate and still come back. I
Right.
thought on that.
And all of your children now, are they here in Texas? Where
No,
they
they're
are?
all up in Kansas. All our kids wound up in Kansas for
Oh,
some
okay.
reason. And they've left Aggie land and are up there.
Nothing
So,
wrong with that.
But,
Kansas is a great place.
but it's wonderful to have a family, and I'm sure that a lot of the fellows did.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Well, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Is any last things you can think of that you'd like to tell the viewers?
No, I think like the other people from GIs on up, we don't consider ourselves heroes.
Right.
So many things can happen, so many things you're not planned for, but they do have a strong feeling for each other. And in a crew that we had, they definitely had, because they helped me even fly it out of a French field one time when we landed there.
Oh, that's right. When you
So,
basically ran out of
Yeah,
gas, I
and
believe.
so, but still, I think that was one of the finest things that showed that you could really be in lockstep, and you'd be in the same motive and do the same things, and that happens to the boys in Iraq and everywhere else, and we have great feelings for them.
Well, thank you much for being here with us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for what you do.
No, thank
for
you.
us. Good.
Our pleasure, believe
Good.
me. Bill Pope was a part of the 8th Army Air Corps, one of the most storied groups of the war in Europe. He flew 23 missions in a B-24 bomber into the heart of Germany, just 2 shy of the required 25 missions they were expected to fly before they could go home. Then, just like that, the war in Europe was over, and our brave soldiers were coming home. We salute Bill Pope for his unwavering spirit, his dedication, and duty to country. Thanks for watching. We'll have another veteran's story next week on Veterans of the Valley.